discussion will include the social and economic effects of marijuana legalization on society in general, law enforcement concerns, health concerns, etc. So what I'd like to do is just to ask for of the panelists for a minute or two of their general opinion on the policy or direction of the proposals in Michigan now. Why don't we start with you?
Personally, I like the tax and regulate proposals that passed in both Washington and Colorado. They have some distinctions between the two. In Washington, they have a set limit for driving, a nanogram limit for THC, and they also don't permit individuals to grow for themselves. So personally, I think that people should be able to be allowed to grow at least a few marijuana plants for themselves if they're over the age of 21. And I also think that the 5 nanogram THC limit for driving is too low, and there should be given some opportunity for people who use cannabis more often to sort of defending for it that they weren't prepared upon being arrested for DUI. Yeah. Other than that, I'm supportive of the tax regulation in Colorado and Washington.
So the question is, where is Michigan?
Where would you go?
Law setting? Well, I think most people know that it's a rapidly changing landscape. Here in Michigan, just a few years ago, 2008, we enacted the Medical Marijuana Act. In Colorado and Washington, decriminalize or legalize, whatever term you prefer, for adults over the age of 21. There are bills in the works in the state of Michigan to decriminalize and have punishment for adults for the use or possession of marijuana for personal use, to change that to civil infraction. We've seen, I believe, at least 5 cities in the state of Michigan over the past couple of years unanimously move to either legalize, decriminalize, or make marijuana the lowest law enforcement priority. There's at least 2 cities that are going to be doing that, I believe, this year in the state, and it seems like the trend is heading towards either lowest law enforcement priority, outright legalization, or civil infraction kind of penalty. As some of you may know, there was an effort to have a sort of an all-out legalization initiative, constitutional amendment at the state level 2 years ago. Our last election that failed to get on the ballot. That would have been different than Washington and Colorado. It would have been a tax and regulate measure exactly, would have been sort of an all-out repeal of cannabis laws and everything else you can imagine. So it seems to me that we're heading in that direction of either an all-out legalization or a tax and regulate scheme. And it seems like politicians and people in general are warming up to that position. A recent poll in the Lansing State Journal, which is unscientific, had over 90% of the people locally supporting reform, if not legalization of marijuana laws. Again, that's probably biased, but that's a pretty high poll number for a local newspaper to come up with. So I think that's the direction things are heading.
Yeah, well, if I were a philosopher king and could just order anything done, I know we're talking about marijuana, but I would make all so-called illegal drugs a public health issue and kind of get it out of law enforcement. If somebody, commits a crime under the influence of drugs, I'm sorry, no excuse. You need to be, dealt with. But because the concept of prohibition in itself is flawed. Now, where, I see Michigan going. Again, it's gradually toward, it would be a step-by-step process. I would first suspect that there will be a kind of decriminalization, small amounts of marijuana, and then later on, as the so-called silent generation, World War guys, folks that grew up around World War II, 32% believe that marijuana should be legal. So-called baby boomers like me and others, it's 50%, okay? Now the so-called Generation X, okay, that's 54% believe it should be legal, and millennials like you all, 65% believe that marijuana should be legal. So I see it as an inevitability. As the older crowd dies off and are no longer voting, we will have decriminalization and legalization within certainly, I'm going to predict that at the most 10 years from now, probably earlier.
Well, that's a depressing one. Because I'm one of them that's going to die out at some And National Council.
No, you're not the silent generation. You're a
Oh,
baby
I'm not.
boomer.
Oh,
You're a baby
baby
boomer. You're
boomers
still,
don't live, huh?
yeah.
So I got a little while to go. And
Can everyone hear? Can you speak a little bit more loudly? This air conditioning system is really loud.
sure. So what's difficult for me today is that the National Council on Alcoholism does not have a particular policy about the law. Our task is to try to help people who are addicted to multiple different drugs is usually what we see. So I'm a treatment person. I also, though, am a parent, a taxpayer, and I'm a sociologist who teaches at LCC. And so I talk about this issue, and I have multiple perspectives on it. In that I'm here as a treatment person, I can tell you that we see people addicted to marijuana just like any other drug, and that it's profoundly affecting their lives, and that not everyone gets addicted to marijuana, the same as not everyone gets addicted to cocaine or heroin or alcohol. There are many people that experiment with one drug and they don't get addicted, but there are some people, and you never know which drug might really be difficult for you to control, who end up with life problems because a particular drug or set of drugs end up really taking a hold of their lives and consuming it. And so we see the most painful situations. That's what I watch every day and try to help people pull out of. When their lives get hijacked, it gets hijacked because of the effects on the brain. And that drugs begin to take control of the brain and you quit making decisions for yourself. So no matter if it's a legal drug, if alcohol is our most prevalent drug problem because it's legal, as a sociologist, I have difficulty with the concept, let's just make them all legal, right? So, because I see people who have lost homes, jobs, families, their kids, because of the effects of drugs and incarceration. So I understand that we don't want everyone in prison who had some marijuana. That's a different issue, right? That's the law. But from a treatment perspective, you never know what drug is going to affect you. Just like when you go into the hospital, you don't know if you'll be allergic and it'll take your life. No one starts out wanting to be an addict. No one starts out, thinking that that's just what they'll become for the rest of their life. We're all just having a good time. We're all just relaxing. The problem is you just can't tell which drug you might be susceptible to. If you're lucky, it won't be anything. And you'll slide on through college and it'll all be okay. But 10-20% of you won't slide on college. You won't be able to pull out of the drug use or the alcohol use. And the pattern will continue. It will continue to take pieces of your life. You lose people every day to drug addiction. So as a treatment person, that's my concern.
I'm not sure you'll need me to use this, but if you can't hear me, just speak up and I'll speak up a little louder. As far as Michigan goes, I'm a prosecutor, and I think from our perspective, the present state of Michigan's law is just flat untenuous at this point, because you've got legalization going on in some places, Michigan's Medical Marijuana Act, which is just untenuous at this point, to say it again, and then you have the federal government out there which really hasn't said or done anything on this particular issue other than to say we'll address it in due course. The idea of marijuana as medicine, I think, is a fallacy. It was a stepping stone that the advocates back in 2008, they knew they didn't have the votes to do legalization right then. You get it recognized as medicine, and then you'll start towards that path. there was a Pew study a couple of weeks ago that for the first time ever, there was more than 50% of the general population from that study thought that legalization was a good idea. I'm not quite sure where they're yet. Obviously, it passed in Colorado and Washington, but California was the first state to go down the medical marijuana road, and everybody thought that would be the first state to legalize. And they voted that down, actually, this past election in California. So the present state of the law in Michigan is untenuous from our perspective. And it's got to go one way or the other.
Okay, so what I'd like to do is to start off with a few questions, and I'll pose them to all or some of the panelists. And what I'd like to do is just start with a basic question to one of the panelists about the differences between marijuana legalization, tax and regulate, decriminalization, and the repeal of laws related to marijuana. So Justin, why don't you
yeah, I mean, my colleagues over here kind of went over it a little bit. My superiors, really. But basically, the tax and regulated systems in Colorado and Washington are, I think, what most people think of when they think of legalization. They think of it being similar to sort of the way that we regulate, alcohol in Colorado. That was one of the sort of slogans and sort of the ways that they sold the initiative. Decriminalization typically just means the removal of criminal penalties for small amounts of marijuana, typically possession of less than an ounce, and all-out sort of repeal of prohibition as the Repeal Today initiative attempted, I think it was last year. That would just get rid of all the laws sort of related to criminalizing marijuana that are currently on the books, and would effectively, I think it would make marijuana a lot like tomatoes. I don't know if Jeff wants to comment on that. That's pretty much 3 different types.
Okay. So one thing that I didn't hear in the initial explanations or initial positions was the economic argument for legalization. So for legalization, decriminalization, or repeal. Can someone touch on that for just a moment before we launch into the other questions?
Well, the United States has about 2 million people in prison. Okay, now 500,000 of those people are in prison for drug offenses. Okay, now the entire European Union, okay, France, Germany, et cetera, which is much bigger, about the size, slightly less than the United States, but it has 700,000 people in prison. So we have almost as many people in prison for drugs than the entire prison population of the European Union. And I guess we got ahead of China now. We got the biggest prison population in the whole world, and a lot of it has to do with drugs, and that's grossly inefficient. And if that resources are reallocated to perhaps providing easy treatment, interdiction, and get a positive way out in criminal justice. Well, if you need criminal justice, a person's out of control, you should be punished for stealing or committing crimes while on drugs. But the enormous waste of life and time and money is it's untenable, period. That's the economic argument that I'm making.
Okay, so the economic argument being that prison is so much more costly than the alternatives.
You can jump in on that. I think Mr. Taylor probably has a good perspective to offer too when it comes to forfeiture, but they always say it's very difficult to measure this because the metrics are unknown. How do you measure a black market? How much money goes to drug cartels? Where, what happens where? How much is avoided in taxes? I don't, unfortunately, know the statistics. Maybe Justin does, but there's billions of dollars spent on nonviolent drug enforcement every year by various levels of government, local, state, federal, DEA, FBI, things like that. Local law enforcement. The argument is you take that away, that money, you bring the money from by legalizing these markets, you tax it, you regulate it, you have better control, you're having a cost savings on the enforcement end of it, whether that's prison, whether that's courts, whether that's police officers. But again, that's all very difficult to measure. A lot of police agencies are obtaining funding through forfeiture, and they're given grants by the federal government, for example. So there's a lot of different angles to the economic market. Some people say You look at, I think the federal government statistics are that about, I think 50% or so of revenue, and I'm sorry I don't have this quote with me, but you can look this up. Marijuana sold in the United States ends up going to drug cartels and things like that. So part of the argument is if you legalize it, that money doesn't go to criminal gangs and people might be willing to do other things, and you would reduce a lot of costs there. The taxes regulated that Colorado and Washington are trying to do, I think, try to address that by filling the state coffers. Colorado's done that. The Michigan Medical Marijuana Act here in Michigan has brought in millions of dollars alone in licensing fees to the Licensing and Regulatory Affairs Department of the state of Michigan. So again, it's very difficult to measure this because the metrics of the black market are unknown. But one of the ways it's important for people to realize the history here is that before marijuana was illegal in the United States, there was the Marijuana Tax Stamp Act. Cannabis and marijuana were used as medicines for a long time. It wasn't until 1937 at the federal level that it was even unlawful. And those laws were preceded by tax stamps where people had to pay taxes for the production or sale or transfer or whatever cannabis. So, and this is my own personal opinion, but it would make much more sense for Michigan or Colorado or Washington to have a legal marijuana market that's regulated and controlled under some supervision, cut the funding off of the drug cartels, have the cost savings, and law enforcement, where necessary, use funds for treatment for people who are addicted, continue the criminal justice enforcement for people who commit crimes, obviously under the influence of those drugs, but then pass some sort of tax. I'm not in favor of sort of the liquor control position that Washington and Colorado have taken. I don't think that's an appropriate way. I think the liquor control system that we have here in Michigan is like a monopoly, and I don't think that the cannabis industry should model that exactly. But there would be a way to have reasonable tax, whether that's a sales tax or an excise tax on a weight or transaction of marijuana that theoretically can be used to fund everything from criminal justice to education to roads and infrastructure and things like that. So maybe Neil's wants to jump in.
Okay, well I'll just say one more thing and then we'll move on to some other questions. I think the major argument and the way the proponents pushed it forward in California was that it was possibly going to fill its budget deficit, like it was just going to be wiped out. So this is at the height of the recession and in a very precarious period for California's budget, and it is going to close it. So I think that states are taking this seriously for that reason, and proponents have been able to push it forward for that reason.
Just one more point.
Sure.
When it comes to hemp, for example, which there's a difference between what people will consider marijuana, which is a slang term, and industrial hemp, which doesn't contain the active cannabinoids that get people high or can be abused. And that's another economic argument that we didn't touch on here today, but hemp is currently illegal. It's treated the same way by the DEA as marijuana is. There's moves in Kentucky, Colorado, places to start industrial hemp farming. So that's another economic argument people look at, is that we import hemp in this country from Canada and China and places like that. And if you legalize that, people wouldn't be getting high off it. You'd have farmers putting fallow fields to work and create jobs and things like that. But I do think you should give Mr. Taylor's perspective on the drug forfeiture and financing of law enforcement, because that's a big part of the economic argument. That's the other side, is the cost of criminal justice enforcement and the cost to society of maybe even addiction and things like that too. So it's a messy question.
Okay.
I can't address that to the best of my ability, but the other issue I wanted to point out is Beck. Threw out some statistics regarding, and if you noticed, he didn't use incarceration rates for marijuana, he used incarceration rates for all drugs, and I think there's a substantial difference. Only 0.7% of our state's prison population is marijuana possession offenses. The only way you can get to prison on a marijuana possession offense in the state of Michigan is to have a prior controlled substance conviction. And it's 0.3% for somebody that's incarcerated in a jail in the state of Michigan. and the numbers in the federal system are even lower. So yes, overall it'll have some economic impact, but the numbers of people incarcerated for marijuana offenses are really quite low, and I think that's a bit of a fallacy. I've been a prosecutor for 16 years. Everybody that comes in on a first-time marijuana possession, the state statute is maximum incarceration of 1 year. 16 years, I've never seen it. It's very, very, very rare that anybody goes to jail at all in my particular county. Ordinarily, it's a fines and costs. If you go to jail, it's just long enough to get booked and get bonded out. So the idea that people on simple possessions are spending large periods of time incarcerated just simply isn't true. There aren't the resources to incarcerate those types of individuals. It simply just doesn't occur. Now, with regard to the forfeiture aspect, certainly forfeitures occur. I would think that I don't have any specific statistics regarding that. Money is seized, but it's a very small percentage of the amount of money that's spent regarding that. So it's not like they're doing it to fund their operations, because it's a pretty small percentage of what they raise. What they raise is a very small percentage of what they expend on controlled substance enforcement. Again, I don't have any statistics as it relates to marijuana, but I would guess that that's a pretty small number, at least in my particular county.
Can I just clarify something here? If you heard me when I first said in my opening speech about... Yeah, okay. When I said earlier, I said that in essence, all drugs, should be regulated and dealt with as a public health problem. I did not say that 500,000 people are in prison for marijuana, okay? Now, with regard to the .08 thing, well, I guess, yeah, for simple possession, fine, they may not be in jail for that. But the waste of the person's life, a young person getting busted for marijuana, even if it's a misdemeanor, that will haunt them for the rest of their life. In fact, the three last presidents, our current president and Mr. Bush and Mr. Clinton, all used marijuana. There is no question about that. Now, if they got busted, I don't think they'd be doing as well as they were doing. And that goes all the way on down the line from the upper class all the way to folks struggling every day in the hood just trying to survive.
And in response to that, there are a number of statutes in the state of Michigan. Specifically, it's called 7411 statute, and it's for first-time drug offenders. And I'm not sure I've ever seen an individual come in that didn't get that opportunity on their first offense. I mean, they're routinely in. Just the way it is.
If marijuana is legalized, lawyers like me are going to lose money representing people like you who get arrested too. There's another economic aspect.
True.
Did you want to add?
I do.
Okay.
Because I don't know of a greater waste of life than to spend it using drugs and dying early. And that's what we see. And we see it every day. And the problem is, when you look at our culture, as a sociologist, I can tell you that we use more drugs in the United States than all the other countries combined across the globe. If you're wondering why we have a lot of people incarcerated because of drugs, because we use drugs a lot in the United States. We're the only country in the globe that advertises prescription drugs on television. And while they're warning you that you might have a heart attack and die, a happy little person is smiling saying, ask your doctor if you can have this prescription, right? We have a culture that promotes drug use. So people die fighting the thinking that we have really promoted it as a culture. And the cost of the lives wasted to drug use is our concern. And when a young person ends up with their parent finding them in the room dead with a needle in their arm, how do you put a price on those kind of things? So the battle against drugs that we're fighting with treatment is for multiple drugs, for a culture that promotes drugs, for a university that I'd like to know what they're doing to stop drugs. Because I went to college here too. And that grieves my heart as a parent, as an educator, and as a treatment person. What about those costs? And to hear, why don't we fill our tax coffers with drug money? And why don't we pay for education through gambling? You know, I'm just appalled that that's our best thinking in the United States of America. That our best creative minds, this is the best we can do. Make money off everybody. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I can just comment. I just wanted to state that I think that, you know, myself specifically, as far as, you know, the regulation aspect that's, you know, is proposed in Colorado and Washington in the past, and, you know, further proposals down the line, I mean, I don't believe in the glorification of drug use. I know that those, you know, proponents of legalization, I guess, will be effective, are not advocating the use of marijuana, and I don't think that businesses, when they do, you know, when they do pop up and they are, you know, legally selling, you know, under a regulated market, I don't want them to have sort of the opportunity to glorify it. What I want is, you know, as far as advertisements are concerned, I don't want marijuana to sort of be advertised like alcohol is. Like, you shouldn't, I don't think you should turn on your TV and have, I mean, honestly, I don't agree that you should be getting any drug advertisements over the television. If somebody has a specific publication for marijuana-related businesses, or if someone has a website, I mean, or, you know, if businesses want to have, you know, a small sort of sign on their business that mentions sort of what the business they take part in is. But I don't want to encourage, you know, teenagers or young people to use marijuana, and I don't want them to encourage them to use any drugs. I just think that we have a problem in this country where we're unable sort of to prevent marijuana use, and our solution so far has been incarceration and sort of charging people with crimes, even if we don't necessarily lock them up. So I just think that regulation is just, and taxation is a better option, and not glorification.
Okay, so why don't we start with one other question. It seems to be one of the simple questions. Should adult citizens be able to legally grow their own marijuana for personal use at home or in their backyard? Should adult citizens be allowed to do that? Do you want to start?
Absolutely. Absolutely, I'll start. I'd say absolutely is my answer. I maybe come from a different view, philosophical view. I was a political science major here at MSU not too long ago. And I think as I've kind of politically developed my opinions, I've come to a very libertarian sort of viewpoint when it comes to drug laws in general and laws in general and marijuana in general. I think that it's your natural right to grow a plant, that this plant is a bequeathment from the Creator, God Almighty, or whatever you want to believe we're here for. That's part of your natural right. It's a fruit of your labor, and you should be entitled to that. You should be able to use it. If you abuse it, go out and get, you know, too hot to drive and hurt somebody, then you should be held accountable for those actions. But if you're not directly harming someone, I think if at most you're harming yourself as an adult. You should be responsible for your own actions, and you should have the freedom to choose whether or not you want to potentially harm yourself by that. Now, part of that is, of course, being informed of the risks and being able to make an informed decision in the first place. But I think that comes back to the philosophy of sort of libertarianism and freedom. So you have freedom of information. You have the information to make a good decision, and you can make that decision. You can make a good or a bad decision, but at least you're allowed to make it. To me, I agree with what the prosecutor said. That the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act is the way it's interpreted across the state right now. It's a smorgasbord. It's turned into a mess. Different people have different reasons for enacting it. Tim can tell you about the history of how it was passed and what its intent was. I'm the kind of person who I voted for, thinking yes, I think it can help people medically, but also yes, I think it should be legalized. And I'm glad that some people view it as a stepping stone. But people who were behind it didn't view it as a stepping stone. They viewed it strictly for medical, I believe. But to me, arbitrary limitations like 12 plants under the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act or 6 plants under Colorado, to me, that's just totally arbitrary. I think you should be able to grow whatever plants you want. If you have acres to speak the farm, you go for it. If you want to sell it, go for it, have a tax, and make it simple.
Kathy?
I don't even want to comment on that one.
You're passing? Okay, Kathy's passing. Anybody want to comment?
No,
Okay, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I think definitely. See, we already have a working model for this, and it's called regulation of alcoholic beverages. Okay, it's largely a federal thing. States do have some discretion also. But the fact of the matter is you can make up to 50 gallons of wine or beer for your own use, okay, and use of your friends. You just can't sell it, okay? You can make up to 10 gallons of hard liquor for yourself. I don't know how many, I mean, I like to drink, but geez, that's quite a bit of bourbon there. But, you know, nonetheless, that is the way the model already exists, and I'm being a kind of a conservative. I like to go based upon what works, okay? And, you know, the gentleman there mentioned about the intent of the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act. Well, I can tell you a little bit about that because I'm the one that got the funding for it, okay, the Marijuana Policy Project. And there's all different logic there, but I will be very honest and say, yes, it is a stalking horse. Yeah, the intent was to ultimately legalize marijuana by going through the medical route, because we got 124,000 people now, maybe more, you know, that are our so-called medical marijuana patients. Some are real, some, well, they say some of them are faking. I don't know about that, but the point is, we have not had a massive breakdown in this society as a result of these 124,000 legal people. We got 29,000 caregivers in the state. If they could grow up to 60 plants, well, gosh, if all 29,000 of them were, you know, growing what, just half the amount, 30,000, that's 870,000 legal marijuana plants that are growing right now in the state of Michigan. I have not seen the destruction of the civilization in the state. In fact, nothing's really happened, in my opinion. The horrors that were predicted have not come true.
So I'd like to follow up on that question. So we haven't seen the horrors yet, but what's the evidence that more people won't use marijuana? And I think one of the big concerns in the debate is that more people under the age of 18, under the age of 21, will start using it. Apparently, the medical community thinks that brains, or at least some research suggests that the development of brains is fragile with respect to marijuana use before age 21. How will we guarantee that there won't be people using it and adopting it before that age?
That cannot be guaranteed any more than it can be guaranteed that a young person will be using alcoholic beverages. Okay. Now, in order to get a medical recommendation under the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act, if you're under 21 or 18, actually it's 18, you have to have 2 doctors sign off. It's a very, very intensive process, and believe me, there aren't any people under 18 that are not truly sick. All right, but at the same time, there's all kinds of ways down, you know, where I live in Detroit, and hey, I've been in the hood for a while, and I say that with pride. And gee, all you got to do is just pay a homeless person to go to the liquor store and, you know, buy you a pint. Okay, it's not really hard to do if you're a young person. So again, we're not advocating young people using marijuana or any other mind-altering drug, but again, it is real, and yeah, so.
I actually have a little bit of evidence that actually points to low rates of use for teens when marijuana is legalized for medical purposes, and also when more liberal laws are passed. As far as liberalization, this country has one of the higher rates of marijuana use in the world, and we also have more conservative laws related to marijuana. In the Netherlands, which has decriminalization in Portugal, both of those locations actually have the lowest rate of teen use in the world. I think Portugal is actually in last, with only 10.5% of teenagers saying they use marijuana in the last year. As far as medical marijuana laws and sort of the liberalization of marijuana laws across this country, the evidence actually, as of right now, suggests that there's a negative correlation between teen use and medical marijuana laws. So in states where they pass medical marijuana laws, like the state of Michigan, the use for teenagers has either stayed the same or actually gone down. And as far as decriminalization goes, a good example is sort of the Mississippi versus Alabama. In Mississippi, you have decriminalization, and
The punishment for less than 30 grams of marijuana is $100 to $250 for the first offense, and the fine is doubled for second and subsequent offenses. And in Alabama, the punishment is up to a year in jail and a fine of up to $6,000. For the past 9 years, this data goes up till 2009, Alabama has had the higher rate of teen use. So the state that has decriminalized marijuana has a lower rate of teen use than the state that doesn't. And I think Mississippi and Alabama, I mean, I haven't personally been down to either state, but my understanding is it's a slightly more conservative area. So I assume that their generally lower rates of use have to do with just their ability to, you know, make the community understand that maybe drug use isn't the right way to go, rather than criminalizing people who make mistakes or just choose to use a substance harmlessly in their own home.
There will always be bad actors in the system, but I think one of the arguments for regulation is that, for example, if you go to 7-Eleven and you're under 21, they're most likely not going to sell you beer. They don't want to lose their license, there's fines, there's penalties. You go to your local drug dealer, they don't have those kind of scruples. You know, you look at the dispensaries, other dispensaries prior to the sort of major shutdown we've had in Michigan that would flaunt the laws and sell to whoever. Yeah, I'm sure there probably were a few, but many of them, or most of them, wanted to be law-abiding, you know, businesses, and they didn't want to get in trouble with the law. So if the laws are set so that only adults can consume, and the penalties are harsh enough to provide a deterrent for providing the minors, I think you're more likely to see a very minimal change, if any. I think things will basically remain the status quo, and I think that's what a big part of this argument is all about, is that, like Tim said, the sky is not falling now that these laws have passed. People are using marijuana now, the money's being spent now. People talk about filling up the tax coffers. Well, I think the argument for people is that we would rather have the money come into the tax coffers than go to, you know, Mexican drug cartels or whatever, for example, stereotypical answer. But, you know, it's recognizing that this already exists, it's already happening. How do we protect people? How do we protect kids? I don't think anybody up here, or most people in here want to see kids using drugs, particularly brain development and things like that. But again, if it's regulated and there's licenses and things like that, people are a lot less likely to violate them, and when they do, you punish those bad actors. And I think you've seen, like Justin said, in Portugal, if we were to do this, might there initially be an initial rise in people or youth using marijuana, for example? There might be, and it may be a little bit more available to them, but it could also be that once sort of the special aura of being, you know, rebellion and engaging and flaunting the law that people do all the time, like our last 3 presidents, you know, maybe that stigma of smoking marijuana will actually cause less people to use it, because it's not going to be this sort of, you know, edgy kind of thing that people do. So I just hadn't heard anybody raise that point. I want to bring it up.
Okay.
Did you have a different point that you wanted to get? Because I wanted to get to.
Because I don't want to hold. No.
Yeah, I wanted to get to on this point. On this point of whether we would anticipate seeing more drug use among younger people, especially given other drugs that you've seen prosecuted.
Well, I don't think there shouldn't be any doubt. I don't think it's just logical. It makes sense that if you legalize something, people are generally going to use it more than if it's illegal. It just makes sense. Now, what the long-term effect of that is, I think everybody's guessing. But going back to the Medical Marijuana Act in Michigan, there, as of 28th of February, there were 131,861 active registered patients, 27,128 primary caregivers. From my experience, very, very, very few of those people are truly sick people. We say that there's 2 columns on that form when you fill it out. There's the cancer, the AIDS, the MS, those sorts of conditions, and then there's the chronic pain condition. A very, very, very large majority of them are that chronic pain, that undiagnosed neuropathic pain. A statistic I like to look at is Canada. Indulge me for a minute. Canada has 34 million citizens, and they have a total of and it's a medical marijuana country. They have a total of 26,000 patients out of 34 million people. Our state has 9.8 million citizens. So So we have roughly a third to a quarter the size of the population. We have 5 times the number of medical marijuana patients. That just can't possibly be the way we want to proceed. It can't possibly be we have that many more sick people. Our system, our present system, is just flawed. And what it is it's allowing, the way it's set up is allowing people that aren't really truly sick to have legal cover for marijuana use. Now, one point that nobody's brought up yet regarding regulation is everybody's saying tax and regulate, tax and regulate, tax and regulate, but even Colorado and Washington, these kind of ideas, people have come up with the ideas, but there's no real schemes in place. And if you look at those laws, they came up with 6 months, 9 months, I forget what it was, to come up with a policy and procedure as to how that's going to take place and what tax rate they're going to use. One of the stats I saw, I think it was for Colorado, is that they're going to pick a 30% tax rate. If the higher you go on that tax rate scale, the more likely people are not going to pay that, and they're going to go back to the street level dealing. It's just a fact. If they can get it for $10 on the corner or $15 from a shop, they're going to pay $10 on the corner. That's just the way it's going to be economics-wise. So. And the other factor with that is that the feds still haven't stepped up and said, we're going to allow Colorado and Washington to do this. Some of the models people are coming up with is states growing it, and I just can't imagine the federal government condoning that. And to some extent in California, they have cracked down on some of the larger growers and larger distribution rings. And then there was one particular gentleman who was in his 30s who had, as I recall, it was over 1,000 plant grow operation. What he thought was doing a legal business in the state of California, and the feds ended up indicting him, and he's looking at significant prison time over that. So it's going to be, and I don't think we're anywhere near the federal government saying we're going to reschedule this. In fact, I think it was last fall or maybe this spring, they refused to reschedule marijuana. And I don't think we're anywhere near them rescheduling it, or they're saying we're not going to enforce these laws at the state level. I think they will. We just haven't figured out what point that's going to be.
Just for the audience, what do you mean by reschedule?
Marijuana is still, there's a lot of contention about that. It's considered a Schedule I drug with heroin. What are some other examples? Cocaine's a Schedule II. Heroin's the only one I can think of.
Acid.
LSD is
testosterone.
LSD is 4 or 5. Testosterone is 4 or 5. Because all of those have some sort of, at some point, accepted medical use. Even cocaine is a Schedule II because it has, in some context, accepted medical use. Marijuana and heroin's the only one I can come up with off the top of my head are considered Schedule I, because according to the federal government and the state of Michigan, there are no accepted medical uses for that.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Sorry.
Were you going to add something?
Well, I think the concern about the young mind is a good one. We know that marijuana affects the brain. We know it affects driving. I mean, we hint here on the panel that, gee whiz, if you go out and kill somebody because you're high on whatever, that you'll have to pay, and you know, minimizing the cost in lives in that area would be a travesty as well. But it does affect the brain, it does affect memory, it does affect mood and behavior, and the same as other drugs. And I would just ask you to think about what direction you want to see the country going in total as far as drug use, but whether legal or illegal, that we as a culture need to look at what we're condoning and what we're promoting. And it'd be one more drug that we say, oh, this is okay, in addition to ask your doctor if you can have this one on the television. So that's, I mean, as a sociologist, that's my concern. But certainly the effect on the brain.
Okay, a couple more comments, and then I'd like to open the floor to the students here.
Yeah, I'll be real quick. There's 2 points. They're kind of disparate. Mr. Taylor mentioned about the federal government. Well,
let me put it this way. If they want to spend their money that way, when you got terrorists, you got all kinds of major criminals, drug cartels, fine, go for it. We're in Michigan, we're giving the middle finger to the federal government, period. All right? And that's how it should be. It's called states' rights. Okay? And that's been upheld in Oregon and a whole lot of other cases, including the United States Supreme Court. So let them go for it. I think that's irrelevant here, to the question. Now, and I think there's a misconception here about Colorado and Washington. Those laws just passed. Some didn't even take effect in Colorado until January 1st, when the governor formally signed off on it according to his constitutional responsibility. So they really haven't had time to develop any type of model. Okay, it is a work in progress. And so that's what I have to say to that. And again, with this young mind thing, all right, so ma'am, I guess you're advocating maybe banning prescription drugs, banning alcohol, because they cause a lot of harm. I mean, I know you can die. Most people, unless you're a really serious drinker, you can die if you drink a fifth of vodka. I mean, that's pretty serious stuff. Nobody ever died of marijuana. Okay, now marijuana directly caused their death. And I want to get back to the other thing about this legalization argument. I know, and I also, by the way, I know Detroit pretty well, because I'm the one responsible for decriminalizing marijuana in the city of Detroit in this last election I headed that. Now, what you got in the city of Detroit, and you got in not just Detroit, it's not, Detroit and other places. I mean, you got, rap and hip-hop artists and all these kind of people. They like to portray themselves as outlaws, so they're glamorizing marijuana, especially. And it only serves as an inducement to a young mind who thinks it's glamorous, that want to rebel and act out. What better way than to send a message that, geez, it's illegal, but I don't know if you can die, blah, blah, blah. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and they do it because, and I would maintain that the scenario in Mississippi versus Alabama, is the same thing. Harsh penalties in Alabama, bad news, kids, that they're going to do it. Where if it's kind of like lower down on the scale, the less you make a big deal out of it, the less you're going to have people acting out and being a wannabe and, all that.
So just real brief, I would just say, Schedule I drugs, no medical use. The federal government has, I think, over 100 plus patents on marijuana, cannabis plant for medical uses. So on the one hand, they say there's no acceptable medical use in Schedule I. You can't use it, you can't grow it, you can't conduct a scientific research, even if you're a University of Massachusetts scientist who just applied for a license and lost a court case. The DEA will not let you grow it, but the federal government will grow it, and they will give the patents, and they will earn all the money when this becomes legalized. Scientific freedom and your rights are in jeopardy because of these policies.
All right, I just wanted to address Prosecutor Taylor's mention of the Canadian medical marijuana system, and the reason why most people choose not to join that system has more to do with their right to grow. They're not allowed to grow their own, so they don't have access to genetics for plants that actually might be positive for their medical use. And currently there's a company that has a monopoly on medical marijuana distribution in Canada. So they're only distributing a couple different types of marijuana, and there's, hundreds of different types of marijuana that serve multiple different medical uses. So to think that that Canadian program is even going to help a small amount of medical marijuana patients, I'm sure some people will benefit, but until they have a program that allows the patients access to a lot more, sort of genetics and a lot more medicine, it's not going to be a sufficient program. It's not going to be positive.
12,000 of the 26 buy it from that company, and 14,000.
My understanding is that they're banning growing their own. So my understanding, that's what the government's trying to do right now. I
haven't yet. Over 50% grow themselves.
Fair enough. If they ban people from growing it, it will be extremely unsuccessful. Another thing is there are not licensed distribution facilities. There are not what we call dispensaries in Canada. So, like I said, yes, fair enough, people are growing it on their own. They still have to import the seeds illegally, so that would be a reason why they would maybe choose not to sort of grow it on their own. So, like I said, there's no licensed, regulated means other than that one company for distribution of marijuana in Canada to medical marijuana patients, so I imagine they would have access to a lot better product if there was a system like that, and a lot more people would likely join such a system.
Okay, so the panelists have done a great job in getting the conversation going. I know you have some questions that may have been follow-ups to what they have stated that they've answered, or maybe you have your own. So if you have a question, could you just please stand up and give your name, maybe where you're from in Michigan, and or where you're from generally. You don't necessarily have to be from Michigan, and state your question. Okay, let's start. So
Hi, I'm Lucas Jonkis. I live in Okemos, right down the street. I'm sorry, what's your name again?
Jeff Taylor.
This question is there. We can go over the statistics. You've mentioned statistics of the amount of people who are actually in jail for marijuana or prison is actually really low. But the thing we can look at is that it's things like gang violence. I mean, drug prohibitions cause the black markets, these drug gangs from Mexico and all these areas, and it flows up from the border. We have all these people who are, especially in low-income areas, getting these violent scenarios for this drug violence. Wouldn't at least decriminalizing marijuana and opening up to some form of market drastically reduce, well, maybe not drastically, but at least reduces violence to some degree? Because I feel like just as many lives can be ruined by this violence being ruined by drug use, but the violence is perforating where most drug users just sit home and just smoke and eat Cheetos.
I don't see that in the context of marijuana, period. I don't see a lot of violence associated with marijuana distribution. Other drugs, not marijuana.
So, like, which drugs? Like heroin or
cocaine, heroin, a lot of violence associated with methamphetamine. Not a lot of violence associated with marijuana.
Okay.
Hi, I'm from Sterling Heights, like 30 minutes outside Detroit. I have two questions actually. One's for Mr. Payne. You were talking about the economic.
Can you just speak a little bit more loudly, or do you want to come over here?
No.
Okay, you don't. Okay, all right. So maybe you can project. Use your outside voice.
I have a question about what you were saying about the economic benefits of legalizing marijuana, and I don't really remember this drug cartel board's name, but one of them was in the Forbes most rich people in the world. So I mean, would you say that could possibly correlate with how it could possibly affect the economy? You said it was kind of like you can't really determine a black market, how it would affect, but do you think that could possibly be an indicator of how it could affect the economy?
Sure. I think you're referring to one of the Mexican drug cartel leaders. I think his name's Joaquin, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I think he's a Sinaloa cartel guy, if I could be wrong on that. But yeah, he's considered to be one of the richest people in the world. Who knows how much money he actually has, because it's such an all-black market. But you can't measure that. But the statistic I was trying to refer to earlier, and I think this is a DEA statistic, is that the Mexican drug cartels earn about half of their revenue from marijuana sales. And that's particularly in border states, California, but it trickles up throughout the entire country. If you cut half of a criminal gang, the Mexican drug cartels are obviously the boogeyman, the stereotypical bad guys that everyone points to. We're just this label. But, you look at what's happening in Mexico, it's terrible. I mean, they're violent people. They target prosecutors. They target judges. They'll kill reporters. I mean, they'll just kill people. I mean, they decapitate people. They're like terrorists, if you want to call them that. So you think if you're dealing with those kinds of organizations and you can cut half of their funding, that dramatically reduces their power, reduces their ability to buy guns, it reduces their ability to bribe people, corrupt politicians, all that kind of stuff. So I do think it would have a substantial effect on undercutting international criminal organizations, criminal networks within the United States. Even the Taliban, for example, makes some money off of marijuana sales, but they make it off of opium. You see governments around the world, even our own CIA has been reported to use drug funds off the books and things like that. So you take away those black markets, who knows what you may affect from some of these different organizations being operated. But I think, like you said, it would probably have an effect.
Anybody else have a response?
I would like you to consider that if you cut the profits from one drug, they're probably just going to try to increase their product, their profits in another way. Because the only way probably for us to effectively as a culture reduce the drug problem is for us to reduce the demand rather than.
I mean, how would you go about that though? I mean, people have been doing drugs for centuries. Like, and saying that we use drugs more than any other country in the world, how would it even be possible to go about telling people how to live their lives?
Well, and it's not about telling people how to live their lives. You effectively changed the face of cigarette smoking in this country from very, very acceptable to not acceptable.
I mean,
because it was a health hazard.
It's not even advertised anymore. People advertise not smoking on. It's not allowed to be on commercials, and people still buy cigarettes every day.
Right. They do, but you've reduced the effect and the socially acceptability of smoking in this country, and a lot of people change their behavior because of it. Because as a country, we can promote and discourage things as a culture, and even as binge drinking versus something as simple as that. When you look at other countries, not all countries drink like we do either. Some drink much more responsibly, and it's what you, the next generation especially, decide you want your country to look like. And you will shape what comes next.
I mean, in the context of marijuana.
So, if you don't mind, we have a couple of other people waiting, and certainly I'm sure the panelists would be happy to hang around for just a little bit, but let's get some other questions in. Yes?
I'm Joel. I just had a really quick question.
Use your outside voice.
Sorry, quick question for the panelists on the panel that opposed decriminalization, legalization. It sounds like the crux of the argument would be that by making it illegal, it's more challenging for people to access it with lower rates of drug use. How would you reconcile that with, say, the statistics from the Netherlands or Portugal that I mentioned earlier that showed that nations that had decriminalized it had lower rates of drug use than nations like the United States that had a war on drugs? Just asking how you would reconcile those two beliefs with Portugal and the Netherlands statistics.
So you're asking me?
Or either, or both of you, or whatever response.
Because I'm not looking at just marijuana. I mean, we have legal drug problems, and we have prescription drug problems, and we have illegal drug problems. So as a treatment person and as a sociologist, what I suggest to you is that we look at all drug use in this country.
And I haven't seen those statistics, but my suspicion is that those use rates spiked before they decreased. And that would be my response. And there's just
Were you going to respond? There's no pressure to you. I just want to get to another question.
No.
Okay. So, you have a question?
Hi, my name's Oliver. I live in Holden, right over there. And I was just wondering, what do you all think is the proper role of government? Because that's all that this comes down to, is what the proper role of government really is. So if I could get a quick answer from each of you, and maybe an explanation of why, that would be awesome.
Well, let's try two and a quick explanation, and then you can pick it up with them afterwards. So you've got the mic, so why don't you start?
Well, I think the role of government should be fairly minimal, and the concept of personal responsibility be paramount. And in terms of the specific, situation here, which is, marijuana that we're talking about, we do need regulation, in some cases, but the idea of being the government being your parent or an entity to tell one what they can do or cannot do with their own body, as long as they're not bothering anybody else, is totally inappropriate.
Not quite sure how to answer that question, other than one of the roles of government is to ensure public health and
public safety, and I think that the regulation of marijuana impacts both.
I think I agree. It's public health and safety and protection. I'm not supportive of big government, so the less regulation, the better, as far as government being in business of selling marijuana. I would not promote that, but I think the role of government should be limited, and it should be protection of people.
I do agree with both of you, by the way. And I mean, I'm talking about we need to have police. We can't have a vigilante justice in this country. And so real crime needs to be dealt with by police and law enforcement, prosecutors, and so forth.
Very briefly, all human beings are endowed by the Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among those are life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. And the role of government is to protect that for you, to protect you from criminals, and to constrain itself so that you may enjoy those rights. That's, I think, the philosophy.
Yeah, I would just say limited. Government should be limited, but any more questions?
Okay, so why don't we take one more question. Again, thank you so much for your enthusiasm, but the panelists will be around if you have individual questions. Why don't you have the last voice?
Yeah, my name is Layla. I'm a student here at MSU, and you all talked a lot about developing minds and young people's use of marijuana, and I'm just wondering, we kind of have like this education drug policy in America where we just tell people no, don't do it, it's bad for you. So I'm wondering what you think marijuana education should be in schools, and if that is something that needs to happen, and if our current drug education policy is actually working in the first place.
I would say that the current policy is not working. I would advocate for a policy that's honest about all drugs, including marijuana. I'm not saying that marijuana is harmless. It's certainly not harmless. But, stuff like saying, smoking marijuana is, if someone says smoking marijuana is going to kill you, I can honestly tell you I actually had one of, when I was being taught drug-related education, one of the flashcards we were gotten was, you can overdose on marijuana. Obviously, that's not true. So telling people that wouldn't make sense. But I would go beyond the just say no mentality and deeply explain to people what these drugs are actually going to do to your body. And there's plenty of evidence that's, I guess on both sides maybe regarding marijuana, but there's certainly evidence against the use of a lot of different drugs. And I think we just need to be honest with students about that, as opposed to saying, it's bad, don't do it, because then we're not educating them on why they shouldn't do it, and then they might go out and do it just to be rebellious.
Just shortly, echo what Justin said. I think people need to be informed, and our education policy should be focused on public health and safety, and not a total prohibition mindset that I think, like Justin said, when you're told as a kid that marijuana is this evil drug, and then you see the president on TV laughing about it, Snoop Dogg, whatever. You just see there's a disconnect, and then that leads you to maybe potentially question other things that harder drugs. And I think it's just about being honest with people, and particularly when it comes to marijuana, there's a lack of good information. Or there's not a lack of information now, but in the past there probably was a lot of propaganda. And the last comment I would make is, and this relates back to earlier. If we legalize marijuana, I don't think everyone, the whole world, not going to start smoking it. If we legalize heroin today, how many of you would walk out here and go stick a needle in your arm? Now, they're two different things, apples and oranges, but I bet most of you would not go shoot up heroin if all of a sudden, the sheriff came in and told you it was okay to do it. So,
well, I agree with these guys, and I'm going to kind of get off. Well, I'm going to just give an anecdotal example. All right, I have one perfect daughter. She's 18. All right. Now, I took my first hit of a marijuana cigarette in my dormitory at the University of Detroit in 1970. All right, and I never quit. All right. Now, when my daughter was born, that's when I was. She's 18 now anyway, and I'm 61. But the point is, I went through this whole thing when she was 2-3 years old, thinking, oh, gee, well, what kind of example am I setting? Maybe I should just go in the closet. Maybe I should just quit. Well, I thought about it, and I said, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to play it straight. And well, she's probably marijuana smoke at least every month of her life. And she's actually a student. She's graduating for the Bolshoi Academy of Ballet in Moscow, Russia. Okay, yeah, doing real nice, real disciplined. And the fact that I didn't make a big deal about it, and go through some lecture and scare stories and on and on and on, I think that was quite helpful. And I assure you, she has no drug problems. Okay.
I'm an educator, and I just ran the drug education program this past weekend. And we didn't just say no as part of the program. We gave realistic, consequences to your health if you used every kind of drug we covered. And most people will not get addicted to drugs. And it is important that we have consistent messages. And I don't think as a culture we give consistent messages about what's appropriate. And I would advocate for that. Most drug education programs are not effective. They make us feel good because we're doing it, but it's really not helpful. So I wouldn't really advocate more drug education in the schools, because programs like the DARE program have not been shown to be helpful as far as reducing drug use. But we're happy they're there. My kids liked it. But as far as investing funds, I don't know if it's helpful. But drug education that I run for my agency revolves around what you can expect, how to limit drinking, how to not get arrested, how to drink responsibly. And I think that's really important kind of education.
We can do that, how to smoke responsibly.
Absolutely, if it was legal. Well, we talk about the effects of marijuana as well, and the effect on the brain and on driving. And so there's a whole different, which is why they have operating while visibly impaired, because people might not be drinking, but they're very impaired as far as driving, which is on other drugs, and we're not sure what kind of drugs, but you can tell they're impaired. So there should be consequences, and obviously are, if you're using, if you're smoking marijuana or any other drug, because driving too slow causes a lot of accidents as well, which is more typical for marijuana, right?
So I would appreciate your joining me in thanking Tim Beck from the Coalition for Safer Michigan, Jeffrey Hank, attorney, Justin Soffa, president of MSU SSDP, Jeffrey Taylor, the assistant prosecuting attorney for Berrien County, and Kathy Simpson of the Lansing chapter of the National Council on Alcoholism and Drug Dependence. They have put on a great conversation for us. Could we give them a hand, please? Thank you all so much for coming.